The vast tapestry of human history is interwoven with threads of mystery. Many ancient cultures, seemingly worlds apart, share curious parallels. Could there be forgotten connections linking the foundational narratives of the Book of Genesis with the secluded wisdom of Tibetan monks? This idea might seem startling at first, yet it invites us to open our minds to possibilities. We must explore beyond the conventional boundaries of history. The deserts of the Near East and the towering Himalayas of Tibet appear to be entirely separate realms. However, whispers of shared ancient knowledge persist for those willing to listen. These whispers suggest a deeper, more interconnected past than we currently comprehend. The Book of Genesis stands as a cornerstone of Judeo-Christian and Islamic traditions. It recounts stories of creation, the first humans, a devastating global flood, and the origins of nations. These narratives have profoundly shaped Western civilization for millennia. They speak of divine beings, human struggles, and cataclysmic events that reshaped the world. For centuries, these stories have been studied primarily within their own cultural and religious context. But what if echoes of these ancient tales or the events they describe resonate in far-off lands? What if the memories preserved in Genesis are part of a larger global human heritage, fragments of which were carried and preserved by diverse peoples across the earth? Meanwhile, nestled high in the formidable Himalayas, Tibetan monasticism developed over centuries. It became a sanctuary for profound spiritual practices and the preservation of ancient knowledge. Tibetan monks, renowned for their discipline and dedication, have acted as custodians of sacred texts and oral traditions. These traditions stretch back into the mists of time, predating even the arrival of Buddhism in Tibet. They speak of cosmic origins, ancient lineages, and cycles of world creation and destruction. Could these remote mountain fastnesses hold clues or parallel accounts that might illuminate some of the deeper mysteries embedded within the familiar stories of Genesis? The isolation of Tibet may have protected ancient wisdom. This exploration seeks to delve into these intriguing, though often speculative, connections. We will journey into the historical and cultural contexts of both ancient Israelite traditions and Tibetan monastic life. We will examine theories, some unconventional, that propose links between these seemingly disparate worlds. While direct, irrefutable proof of Tibetan monks appearing in the literal text of Genesis is not what we seek, the possibility of shared, ancient influences or common sources for their respective wisdom traditions offers a fascinating field of inquiry. It challenges us to reconsider the origins of sacred stories and the interconnectedness of our ancient ancestors. The ancient culture of Tibet is profoundly deep, its roots extending far into the pre-Buddhist era. Long before Buddhism graced the roof of the world in the 7th century CE, the indigenous Bon religion flourished. Bon traditions possessed their own rich cosmology, shamanistic practices, and creation myths. These ancient beliefs were deeply intertwined with the natural world, the sacredness of mountains, and the movements of celestial bodies. This long history suggests a continuity of spiritual seeking and knowledge preservation that spans millennia. It is a legacy that speaks of resilience and a profound connection to the primeval forces that shape existence, a connection that monks later inherited and evolved. Tibetan monks, through centuries of dedicated practice, became the meticulous guardians of this vast repository of knowledge. Within the stone walls of remote monasteries, often perched precariously on mountain slopes, they painstakingly copied ancient scriptures. They memorized complex philosophical treatises and passed down oral traditions from master to disciple. This unbroken lineage of learning ensured the survival of wisdom that might otherwise have been lost to the ravages of time or political upheaval. Their commitment was not merely academic, it was a sacred duty to preserve the spiritual heritage of their people and perhaps of a wider ancient world. These traditions often spoke of cycles of time and previous world ages. When we examine Tibetan creation myths and stories of world cataclysms, intriguing parallels with Genesis themes can sometimes be discerned. While the specific names and narratives differ significantly, the underlying archetypes occasionally resonate. For instance, some Tibetan traditions speak of primordial chaos or waters from which the world emerged. They also contain accounts of devastating floods that reshaped the land and tested the endurance of early beings. These are not direct copies of Genesis, of course. Instead, they might represent independent cultural responses to universal human experiences or memories of ancient global events, filtered through unique cultural lenses, much like the Genesis flood narrative. The existence of such thematic similarities across geographically distant cultures raises profound questions. Could they be evidence of a shared ancestral memory, a common human experience of great antiquity? Perhaps ancient peoples across the globe witnessed similar cataclysmic events, or developed similar cosmological understandings based on universal observations. Another possibility, often explored by independent researchers, is the idea of a lost, sophisticated global civilization that influenced various nascent cultures, including those in the Near East and the Himalayas. This mother culture might have disseminated core myths and symbols that were later adapted and transformed by its inheritors in different regions. Several unconventional theories propose that ancient migrations or cultural transmissions may have connected the worlds that produced Genesis and Tibetan traditions. Some researchers speculate about vast prehistoric movements of people. These migrations could have carried shared mythologies and spiritual concepts across continents long before recorded history as we know it. Such theories often challenge mainstream historical timelines. They suggest that our understanding of ancient intercultural contact might be incomplete. The sheer distances involved make these ideas difficult to prove, yet the persistence of similar motifs in disparate cultures keeps these questions alive and fuels ongoing investigation. One recurring theme in alternative historical research is the idea of lost tribes or dispersed ancient populations. For example, theories surrounding the lost tribes of Israel sometimes suggest that some of these groups migrated much farther east than traditionally believed. Could elements of their traditions, including early forms of Genesis narratives, have found their way to the remote Himalayan regions? If so, they might have subtly influenced or blended with pre-existing local beliefs over many centuries. This is highly speculative, of course. There is no direct archaeological or textual evidence from Tibet explicitly mentioning such an influx related to early Israelite traditions in the Genesis timeframe. Beyond grand migration theories, some look for more subtle clues in linguistic traces or symbolic correspondences. Proponents of such links might point to supposed similarities in certain ancient words, cosmological symbols, or foundational spiritual concepts. For instance, the reverence for sacred mountains is a powerful theme in both Tibetan traditions, like Mount Kailash or Meru, and biblical narratives, Mount Sinai, Mount Zion, or the mountains of Ararat, where Noah's Ark rested. While such parallels could be coincidental or archetypal, some researchers argued they might hint at a deeper, shared symbolic language from a remote past, a kind of universal grammar of spiritual understanding. It is crucial to acknowledge the highly speculative nature of these theories when directly linking Tibetan monks or specific Tibetan knowledge to the composition of Genesis. Mainstream biblical scholarship and archaeology do not support the idea of Tibetan monks being physically present or directly influencing the authors of Genesis during its formation. The connections discussed are generally interpretive. They rely on identifying thematic parallels, exploring possibilities of very ancient indirect cultural diffusion, or postulating shared human responses to universal experiences. These theories often exist on the fringes of academic discourse, but continue to intrigue many. When we speak of evidence for ancient connections between Tibetan traditions and Genesis, it is important to define our terms. Direct, unambiguous archaeological proof, such as a Tibetan monastic text found within an early Israelite settlement dating to the Genesis period, is non-existent. Similarly, there are no explicit mentions of Tibetan monks or their specific doctrines within the canonical text of Genesis itself. The evidence often presented by proponents of these theories is usually circumstantial. It relies heavily on comparative mythology, symbolic interpretation, and the re-evaluation of anomalous historical or cultural data. What proponents often highlight are shared archetypal patterns present in both Genesis and ancient Tibetan lore. For example, the concept of a world tree or axis mundi, a central pillar connecting heaven, earth, and the underworld, appears in various forms across many cultures, including some interpretations of Tibetan mandalas and potentially the Tree of Knowledge in Eden. Similarly, narratives of a great flood wiping out a previous iteration of humanity followed by a renewal through chosen survivors are remarkably widespread. The Genesis flood story and certain Tibetan legends share this broad thematic structure, though the details and cultural contexts are vastly different. The profound respect for and reliance upon oral tradition in Tibetan culture also offers a point for consideration. For millennia before texts were widely written and disseminated, stories, wisdom, and historical accounts were passed down verbally. The narratives in Genesis 2 are believed by many scholars to have originated in ancient oral traditions long before they were compiled and written. Could these separate streams of oral history, originating in deep antiquity, have drawn from a common wellspring of human experience, or a shared ancient corpus of foundational myths that predates their later, distinct cultural expressions? This remains a tantalizing but unproven hypothesis. Ultimately, the question of concrete links between Tibetan monks and the Book of Genesis in a direct historical sense remains firmly in the realm of mystery and speculation. While tangible proof of direct influence during the formation of Genesis is lacking, the thematic parallels and the persistence of unique theories encourage us to think more broadly about our ancient past. They remind us that civilizations did not always develop in complete isolation. The search for these elusive connections continues to inspire those who believe that fragments of a forgotten global heritage may yet be pieced together, revealing a more intricate and interconnected story of humanity's spiritual journey.